Have you ever stopped to think that at the very root of faith, the sacred, there might be something a lot more primal, something like fear? In this explainer, we're going to dig into this deep and sometimes uncomfortable relationship between what we worship and what makes us tremble. So let's dive in. This quote from Karen Armstrong, who's a brilliant writer on religion, just nails it right from the start. It's not about having everything figured out. Nope. It's about that raw human feeling. Just imagine standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon or looking up at a sky just packed with stars. That feeling of being so small. That trembling, she says, that's where faith is really born.
Okay, so for our first section, fear, religion's first teacher, we're rewinding the clock way back. We're trying to imagine what it was like for the very first humans, huddled together, seeing lightning crack open the sky. I mean, how did they even begin to process all that?
And that leads us to the big question, right? Was it just straight up paralyzing fear that made us invent gods to protect us? Or was it more like awe, a kind of spellbound fascination with the whole mystery of it all? Or, and this is the interesting part, what if they're basically two sides of the very same coin? So you've got two really powerful ways of looking at this. On one side, you have the historian Yuval Noah Harari, who sees religion as a super practical tool, a kind of social technology for getting a whole group of anxious people to work together. But then you've got the psychologist Carl Jung, who has this deeper, more personal take. For him, fear wasn't just a problem to be solved. It was the actual doorway to what he called the numinous, that shiver down your spine feeling of being in the presence of something huge, powerful, and totally beyond you. And here's where it all comes together. Thinkers like Joseph Campbell and Alan Watts, they saw fear not as the final destination, but as the raw material. When our ancestors faced that fear, instead of just running from it, something incredible happened. That terror started to transform. It blossomed into awe, into reverence for the mystery of life. And if feeling that big, you have to do something with it. And that's how you get ritual, the language of faith. But something happened on the journey. That personal, mind-blowing experience of awe, it started to get organized. It got structured. And in that shift, from personal reverence to a set of rules, a door creaked open. A door for fear to be used not for wonder, but for control. So how in the world does that happen? How does awe become authority? Well, it's a slow burn. It starts with that shared wonder, right? But as societies get bigger, the fear of chaos, the fear of messing it up, starts to grow. So to create some order, you get systems and texts and dogma. And then comes the big switch. Suddenly, it's not about your personal experience anymore. It's about obedience to the system. Following the rules is being holy. Bishop Desmond Tutu just cuts right to the heart of it here. He says the problem starts when love, the core message, gets turned into law. It's fear. Fear of being different, fear of losing power, that makes institutions build defenses around something that's supposed to be limitless, like grace. And this is the bottom line, something thinkers like Malcolm X pointed out so clearly. The moment faith gets tangled up with power, with an empire or a political agenda, its whole purpose flips. It stops being about freeing your soul and starts being about keeping the system in control. Fear just becomes another tool in the toolbox. So when you weaponize fear like that, it's going to lead to conflict. It creates wars, not just out there in the world, but inside our own heads too. Let's take a look at these two battlefields. On the one hand, you have the outer war. This is the obvious one, right? The one we see in the history books. It's when we take all our own fear and insecurity and project it onto some other group. That's where you get crusades, holy wars, persecution. But then there's the inner war. And this one is so much quieter. It's the fight against yourself, when you push down your own doubts, your own vulnerabilities, what Jung called your shadow. That buried fear, it's the fuel for a rigid, judgmental mind toward yourself and everyone else. So how do you stop it? How do you end the war? The Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, gives us this beautiful, profound answer. He says the whole cycle of making enemies, inside and out, only ends when we can turn around and face our own fear with compassion, with love. Because the enemy was never really out there. It was just a reflection of the parts of ourselves we hadn't learned to love yet. And that idea, it leads us to our final and honestly most hopeful part of this journey. If we can see fear for what it is, can we actually move past it? Let's explore what it might look like to find a faith that isn't built on fear. Which brings us to the ultimate question. It's one thing to see the problem, but what's the solution? How do we, as individuals, as communities, as a species, actually make that shift from a faith of control to a faith of connection and compassion?
Well, the wisdom from all these different traditions gives us a kind of roadmap. The Dalai Lama says it starts inside by actively training our hearts to be more compassionate. That gives us the strength for what Desmond Tutu calls radical forgiveness. And all of this is anchored in what teachers like Eckhart Tolle talk about, being present, because fear can't really exist in the now. And finally, Joseph Campbell reminds us we have to tell new stories, stories of coming together, not of conquering each other.
And for a final thought, the mystic poet Rumi just says it so beautifully. True love, real spiritual connection, has nothing to fear because it has nothing to protect. The ego, that little part of us that's always scared, it just dissolves. When you become one with everything, what's left to be afraid of? And that's where we'll leave it. Our spiritual story began with a tremble, with fear in the face of a huge mystery. That fear gave us awe and ritual and religion, but it also gave us control and conflict. The great question for us now is whether we can finish the story. Can we move from a sacredness that was born from being scared to one that's born from a fearless, boundless love?